In 1853, a 24-year-old Bavarian immigrant named Levi Strauss arrived in San Francisco with a small supply of dry goods and an intention to profit from the gold rush. He did not pan for gold. He sold supplies to the people who did. He changed his name to Levi. He founded a dry goods wholesale business. And in 1873, partnering with a Nevada tailor named Jacob Davis, who had figured out how to use copper rivets to reinforce the stress points of working men's trousers, he received patent number 139,121 from the United States Patent Office for an improvement in fastening pocket openings. The garment that patent covered became the blue jean. The company Levi Strauss built around that patent became, over the following century and a half, one of the most recognized brand names in human history. What almost nobody knows is how close that brand came to disappearing entirely in the 1970s, and what one family did to save it. Levi Strauss died in 1902, childless, leaving his company to his four nephews from the Stern family. The company passed through generations of family management and remained entirely privately held for more than 60 years after his death. It was a well-run, profitable, characteristically American business, making workwear, expanding into casual clothing as the culture shifted, and benefiting enormously from the cultural explosion of denim in the 1950s and 1960s, when blue jeans ceased to be workwear and became the defining garment of American youth culture. By 1971, Levi Strauss was generating approximately $400 million in annual revenue and needed capital to fund international expansion. The family made a decision that, in retrospect, was nearly catastrophic. They took the company public. The problems that followed the 1971 IPO were not immediately obvious. The stock performed reasonably well. Revenue continued to grow. The company expanded internationally as planned. But the pressure of quarterly earnings reporting began to reshape decision-making in ways that conflicted with how the company had been run for over a century.Short-term financial targets began to influence product decisions. The brand began to stretch, licensing agreements multiplied, products were introduced that had no relationship to the company's core identity, and the manufacturing quality that had made Levi's jeans the standard of American workwear began to erode under cost pressures that public market investors consistently demanded. By the early 1980s, the company's market position was deteriorating.The brand that had been synonymous with American authenticity was becoming indistinguishable from its competitors. The family member who recognized what was happening most clearly was Robert Haas, the great-great-grandnephew of Levi Strauss, a Harvard Business School and Peace Corps veteran who had returned to the family company in the 1970s and watched the public market dynamics systematically undermine what had made the brand valuable.Haas had a specific theory about what was wrong. The company's obligation to quarterly earnings had forced it to make decisions that destroyed long-term brand equity in exchange for short-term financial performance. The brand was being harvested rather than grown. And the only way to stop the harvesting was to remove the company from public markets entirely. In 1985, the Haas family executed a leveraged buyout of Levi Strauss and Company, taking it private for approximately $1.6 billion. It was, at the time, the largest leveraged buyout in the history of the apparel industry.What happened over the following decade inside Levi Strauss under private ownership is one of the most remarkable corporate rehabilitations in American brand history. Freed from the obligation to report quarterly earnings to public shareholders, Haas and his management team made decisions that would have been impossible under public market scrutiny.They closed manufacturing plants that were economically marginal, but whose workers they chose to support through extended severance and job retraining programs, decisions that cost money in the short term and built employee loyalty and public reputation in ways that compounded over years. They published a comprehensive corporate ethics and conduct code in 1992 that was one of the first of its kind in American business.Explicitly committing to standards of supplier conduct on labor practices, a decision that was controversial at the time, and that positioned the company favorably when labor practices in the global apparel supply chain became a major public concern a decade later. They made a decision in 1992 to extend benefits to the domestic partners of gay and lesbian employees,
The stitching here could be
a decision that was remarkable for its time, and that reflected Haas's conviction that the company's workforce and its values were inseparable. They rebuilt the quality standards for the core product. They focused the brand rather than extending it. They made choices that were designed to make the company more valuable over a decade, not more profitable over a quarter. The financial results vindicated the approach. By the mid-1990s, Levi's was generating annual revenues of over $6 billion. The brand had recovered its premium positioning. The 501 jean had been explicitly repositioned as a cultural icon rather than simply a commodity garment, a product that carried cultural weight precisely because it had not been cheapened. The company was, by most measures, more valuable than it had been at any point in its history. And then the family made a different kind of mistake. In 1996, seeking to provide liquidity to family members who had held equity in the private company for over a decade, Levi's undertook a recapitalization, essentially borrowing approximately $3 billion to pay a dividend to its shareholders, who were almost entirely members of the Haas family and their descendants. The recapitalization left the company with a debt load that was manageable in good times, but that became constraining as the denim market faced new pressures in the late 1990s. The rise of designer denim, brands like Calvin Klein and Gap that competed directly for the premium positioning that Levi's had worked to rebuild, and the simultaneous explosion of athletic wear as casual clothing created competitive pressures that the company's debt burden made difficult to address aggressively. Revenue peaked at approximately $7 billion in 1996 and then declined for years. The company went through rounds of cost-cutting, plant closures, and workforce reductions that were painful and that damaged the culture that Haas had so carefully built. The recovery from the post-1996 difficulties was slow and uneven and is still, in some respects, ongoing. Levi Strauss returned to public markets in March of 2019, pricing its IPO at $17 per share and raising approximately $6.5 billion in its initial valuation, representing a return on the family's 1985 buyout investment of approximately $1.6 billion that, while impressive in percentage terms, reflected the complexity of the intervening decades rather than a simple triumph. The IPO valued the company at approximately $6.5 billion compared to the approximately $1.6 billion the family had paid to take it private 34 years earlier. The return was real. The journey had been more complicated than the numbers suggested. What the Levi Strauss story demonstrates is something that most business histories simplify into a cleaner narrative than the facts support. The family that saved the brand did so through a specific set of decisions, removing it from public markets, accepting short-term financial sacrifice for long-term brand integrity, committing to values that were unpopular with shareholders at the time, but that proved prescient. Those decisions were genuinely admirable and genuinely consequential. They were also followed by a decision, the 1996 recapitalization, that nearly undid much of what had been accomplished. The lesson is not that the Haas family was right about everything. The lesson is that they were right about the most important thing, that a brand's long-term value is inseparable from the integrity of the decisions made in its name. And that being right about the most important thing is both necessary and insufficient. It keeps you in the game. It does not guarantee that you win it. Subscribe to the reckoning.